So we always knew we wanted death to be a big part of the game. I mean, it's a hospital game. The real question was how far would we take it? So how many people do we kill? It's fun, right, to see your patients burst into flames and melt into the floor. But also you don't necessarily want too many people to be dying because that might not feel great. And we wanted the player to be able to have a meaningful impact on the number of patients that are dying in their hospital. If they do well, then patients should die less. And if they do poorly, then patients should die more. But we also never wanted death to go away entirely. We wanted to make sure that the player was always experiencing a little bit of death in their hospital, just because it's fun to see, fun to have around. So no matter how well you do, you will still see a little bit of death. There was the easy option of just having a patient walk out of the room and drop dead, and then we'd have one size fits all. Every patient dies in the same way, and it's nice and simple. But that's not how we do things. We wanted something a bit more elaborate. So we took a look at all of the different patients we have, so there's 7 different species, all of the different diseases they can have, which there's 50, and all of the rooms they can go in, and we had to figure out a way to kill patients in every single one of those scenarios. It's over 1,000 ways to kill a patient.
In a very fitting and poetic way, death came towards the end of developing Galacticare, and it had to act as a glue between the pre-existing systems. So we already had the characters, the rooms, the conditions, and with those many combinations, we had to create death sequences that covered all of them before we ourselves died. By grouping all the conditions into these sort of 4 groups, we created a dissolve death, a shatter death, a melt, and a incinerate death.
So the whole process was like a balancing act between quality and reusability. In some cases, we struggled at the beginning to find that balance, and we ended up having to sacrifice a bit of visual quality, like with the Shatter Death, so that it would be more easily adaptable to all species in the game. Whereas in the case of the Dissolve Death, just the simplicity of the idea itself allowed us to get to a final result much faster.
I really love the Shatter Death. I think it's the way the character sort of puffs out and crumbles. It just looks so ridiculous.
Shatter, yeah, not a big fan of it. I mean, it looks cool. Yeah, it was a pain in the ass to work on that one. So no, not for me. My favorite is probably the melt one, because it's quite absurd, and I just love the way that the patients just melt into the floor into puddles of goo.
The diagnosis room, the way that kills the patients is that they're basically these drones that come in and analyze the patient to see what's going on. Now, they're kind of agile, they're quick, they're speedy, and it's kind of like this atomic gyroscope that happens where you get faster and faster and faster, and there's this sort of the energy and the sheer magnitude of their speed kind of dissolves any kind of matter inside, which happens to be the patient.
So we all have bad days, right? When no matter what you do, everything seems to go wrong. You wake up late after a wild night out, and you realize you're out of coffee, so you rush to the Galactic Exchange to buy some, which makes you late for work. In the end, you end up pushing the wrong buttons at your desk and massively overload the diagnosis drones with so much energy that it ends up atomizing your patients. It happens.
Whenever we came up with a death sequence for a room, we were really thinking about what the themes of this room, what the personalities, and what would happen if they were pushing their treatment sequences to the limit. And with this room, it felt like the drones are really kind of just going haywire. They're kind of computer automatons, and it's as if like they're going in overdrive, and they're almost over-treating and over-analyzing the patient. The main issues that came up with that and a few other rooms is making sure that we've got enough room to play with, creating these really interesting and bizarre death sequences.
So space is quite limited in the diagnosis task, which meant we had to keep the whole death visuals pretty contained. Physically speaking, we couldn't get out of the boundaries of the desk. So yeah, we had to keep it pretty contained, physically speaking. But nothing was stopping us on the intensity front, however, so we went crazy with that.
The speed and motion and kinetic energy was sort of erupting in front of them, and then basically kind of like undoing everything they were trying to treat. The skin lab is basically a giant evil scientist chemistry set gone wrong. Like I've always said, if you're going to play with hazardous chemicals, you're going to end up with seeing some bones. So that felt like the natural conclusion of this place.
Chemistry is difficult. It's easy to make a mistake and mix the wrong amount of this compound or this other compound. So even the smallest mistake, the smallest error can have like fatal consequences. Relatively speaking, I think SkinLab was one of the more straightforward rooms in terms of that visuals, because we just cover the patient with liquid, right? And that liquid is opaque, which means once the patient is covered and you cannot see it anymore, we can just do whatever we want.
If it all goes wrong, then really you're just going to melt away everything apart from your bones. And it felt like a really good opportunity to sort of show the bones we have for each of these characters. The bones felt such a natural thing. We already had these bones and skeletons that I'd created for each of the species, but this felt like a great opportunity to put them in and have them just sort of fall away, and Will created this wonderful kind of motion where they just sort of fall like a pile underneath, and it just felt like it just told the story beautifully. It's not really so much about the prop itself, it's how wonderful the syringes moving up and down, the liquid, the pumping. I think that they're the style of the show.
So the Dreamarium, we have 3 elements to the treatment. We have the doctor, we have the patient, and we have the brain, the big brain that sits in between the patient and the doctor. So this big brain, it's an alien life form with telepathic capabilities.
I think the Dreamarium is naturally abstract and strange and ethereal and weird, and I think it's kind of way it should be. And basically, it goes from being Dreamarium to Nightmarearium, or whatever you want to call it, because the whole point being is this strange creature is used to facilitate looking into patients' minds and seeing their deepest, darkest thoughts. And the death sequence for Dreamarium is really like somehow this brain creature's lost control, and it panics, and both you can see it in the animation where both tentacles sort of go over to the patient, and it's as if like suddenly I've screwed this up, and trying to solve the issue in the last moments when it's almost as if the dream has got ahead of itself and taken over, but it's too late. And then this wonderful kind of ethereal dissolve animation happens, as if like the dreams become reality. It just sort of fades the patient away in a really dark way. The trickiest part about creating a death sequence for it was simply because it's a really abstract room. It's trying to do a lot. It's trying to make it clear that it's like more psychological based in terms of its treatment. It's doing it from the perspective of a weird sci-fi alien, and it's also trying to do the job of suggesting that this alien is looking into a person's mind and reading their thoughts and getting involved in their dreams. So with that, we had to create the story where, okay, how does this dream go wrong, and how can we communicate that?
So we have rooms like projectile medicine, for instance. Projectile medicine is very, very straightforward, right? It's a big gun, and you shoot at the patients with it, and it's really easy to understand, and you can see what's going on. And when a patient dies, you see why, right? You use the flamethrower to treat a patient, and you overdid it. But in the Dreamarium, it's really confusing.
The way that laser surgery kills a patient is that the drones, who have like these 2 sort of distinct personalities, are basically over-treating and going too far with their treatment process.
These drones, that treat the patient, they have a personality of their own. Sometimes they play with the patients a little bit. Sometimes things just get out of hand.
And then there's a wonderful moment where the more agile one accidentally turns, hits this sort of the more methodical one, which then falls into this hole, and it sort of like in an embarrassed way sort of retreats back into its home again. And it really goes back into sort of the theming of the rooms, and how in particular the laser surgery was about the sort of relationship between these 2 drones.
The idea for this room was that these 2 drones would have very distinct personalities. You have this drone which feels or looks a bit calmer, and the other one is the one who performs the actual surgery on the patients and is a bit more impulsive.
What I like about it particularly is that the room relies on this wonderful choreographed sequence of kind of precision and madness, and we even talked about the BPM of the room, and that all the animations were working in time and rhythm. The 2 drones could sort of treat the patient to a particular rhythm and at the same time be kind of in sync with one another. And the one way we did that is when we spoke about how one would be much more like the base, the backbone of the sort of dance routine or musical kind of treatment sequence, and the other would be much more like the treble and free-flowing notes, if you like, and that kind of formed the two personalities of these little robots.
It is my favorite room, and I feel like it's the most visually striking, most visually impressive death out of all the deaths that we have in the game. All the lasers and drones and the walls, which represent the music visually. It's my favorite room for a reason.
The treatment room that I really love the death sequence of is the general diagnosis one. I think what I like about it is that it's the beginning of the whole treatment process, and you go into this room which you go in, every condition has to go into. But what I love about the death sequence is that it's the erratic nature of these drones just forming this really wonderful, almost like firework display explosion effect, where it just really suits it. It really tells you as a player that, you know, the world of Galacticare has this edge to it, and it's a bit, and things can go wrong, even something as innocuous as general diagnosis. It gives you a little insight into the sort of personality of even those small drones. I think I'm really happy that we could get these additional kind of like characters here and there where they're not as at the forefront as some of the ones you might see, like your consultants that come into the hospital or your patients. But you get these little small personalities which are almost in the corners of the game, like even when it can be some of the conditions that come in, and they've got their own little personality to them, or they're actually sentient parasites, or they're robots that are just doing some of the treatment stuff, and it adds this depth to the game where things are happening at different levels.
So ultimately, there's a lot of things you can do as a player to keep your patients alive if that is what you wish to do. If you wish to see more death and make your doctors mad, don't level them up, don't do any research, make your patients wait a while before their treatment. All of these things will allow you to experience our wonderful death animations.